So, our panel is about the state of liberal democracy today and how we can approach it and how we can deal with the situation from the legal point of view. We are not going into the political issues, why we have a certain decline of the liberal democracy, which is a specific form of government. Unique form, different from all other forms of government, but there are also certain differences in quality of democracy. And today we can see a general global crisis of democracy. There are new threats from outside and from within. From outside we can see that some democracies are attacked, like in Ukraine, from outside. Democratic Ukraine is attacked by autocratic Russia. But in the most democratic countries, there is also a new threat from within. It is a populist threat. I would say from the beginning that this is different from the situation with the first decline of democracy in between the two world wars. 1918, just after the First World War, all European states were democratic. End of the 30s, if I remember me correctly, there was only 11 democratic, but 16 states changed from democracy to authoritarian regimes. Also first decline of democracy in Europe, at least. So, and we should discuss this. It is a problem also now, a certain decline, and we have not more the optimism of the 90s, and we are concerned about that. But there is also a differences, because from within, the main challenge is now not from authoritarian movements, but from populist movements, which are arguing not against democracy, but exact in opposite, that they are the real Democrats, but the populists are characterized by a new ideology which is saying that there is a dichotomy between the people, and the populists are representing the people, and the corrupt elite. And therefore, they are arguing within the democratic framework of argumentation. Nevertheless, that is a threat, because normally in the public we are saying democracy, but we should be, as lawyers, more precise. It is a constitutional democracy. And constitutional democracy is based on two pillars. One pillar is democracy, the other pillar is rule of law. Democracy is majoritarian principle. Rule of law is counter-majoritarian principle, and this is very important by this dispute between populists and supporters of liberal or constitutional democracy, because democracy should not become like in antique Greece, tyranny of the majority. And this is the task of the rule of law, to look for that and to restrict democracy in a certain framework, what is possible and what is not possible. And the populist argumentation is that it is a true democracy is without these control mechanisms of rule of law. And constitutional judiciary is exact in the focus of this argumentation, because the constitutional judiciary is dealing with politics like the politicians, but from different angle, from the legal point of view, not from political point of view. Of course, there is a difficulties to distinguish, but I think it's possible to distinguish. So, and this is a new threat. The second new threat is which is linked with the first, the populist challenge of the balance between democracy and the rule of law. This is the first threat. And the second is linked with that. This is also new problem of intransparent or hidden manipulation of the public opinion, especially in electoral campaigns. And the free building of public opinion is covered by the notion of free elections. But we have now the situation that with social networks, which are circumventing all the mediatizing institutions like free press and political parties and so on, there is very easy to manipulate the public opinion. And this is the first case, Romanian case, where the Constitutional Court said that the first round of presidential elections in the December 24 was invalidated because of the manipulation of the new legal subject, I would say, free building of public opinion also. And we can discuss not the case as such, but what are the consequences and what are the preconditions for that. The Venice Commission is a body of Council of Europe, and Council of Europe is the only or the biggest organization of liberal democracies, I would say. And the Venice Commission is an expert body which is issuing expertises on problems of democracy and rule of law. And in January this year, the Venice Commission issued a report on the Romanian case. One, what are the preconditions when we are saying that the manipulation of the will of the voters reached such a level when it is possible and maybe also obligatory to quash the result. Also, this is two new threats. We can discuss that because they are linked, with each other. And we have here a very prominent panel here. And I will start with you. Yeah. You are Laura Diaz Bueno, constitutional member of the Constitutional Court of Spain, and Dr. Stephan Harbarth is the president of the German Constitutional Court. Madame Juliane Kokott is Advocate General of the European Court of Justice. Advocate General is a French institution, but also in several other countries are known, but also in the European Court of Justice. Then we have Víctor Olea, the president of the Mexican Bar Association till 2025, till recently. Professor Shimon Shetreet, President International Association of Judicial Independence and World Peace. Also, this is a very important, also global institution, and a professor at the Hebrew University in Israel. Then following by Madame Marieta Safta, which is a law professor at Titu Maiorescu University in Bucharest. And I see you, so, and also Dariusz Mazur, Deputy Minister of Justice of Poland. I have invited Mr. Mazur especially for the case because you are dealing with a reverse situation, because you are now trying to correct to correct this development by the previous rather populistic government. So I think we can start in this order with you,
Okay.
and then we are going further.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure, for me it's fine.
Please. Also 5 to 6 minutes,
Okay.
then short discussion, and then discussion with you.
Okay,
Thank
wonderful.
you.
First of all, thank you, Egils, for your trust in participants of this panel regarding one of the most pressing challenges for for liberal democracy in the first half of this century. And as you said, the background of our discussion is that the crisis of our liberal democracy is partly due to populist tendencies. We have the diagnosis of the problem, as you said, but now we should answer whether liberal democracy has legal instruments to defend itself against the new dangers. And in my opinion, the answer to this question is yes. The legal instruments that liberal democracies currently have in place are fully useful to defend themselves against populism. There is a tendency to think that these classical instruments of liberal democracy are not useful to defend ourselves against populism, and I think this belief is due to the following. In these centuries, as Egils said, populism uses democratic mechanisms to erode democracy and gain the power. But populism uses these democratic instruments spuriously, to evade the law unfairly. Society, public institutions, and political parties are not in the habit of reporting this misuse. And I wonder why. First, I think it's because finding the limit between the legitimate and illegitimate use of democratic instruments is hard. Second, because I think it's difficult to list the values that we agree are common for our societies. But above all, at least in countries like Spain, I believe that the absence to report this misuse of democratic instruments by the populist is influenced by another fact of the highest relevance. It is assumed, for example, in Spain, that democratic instruments are at the service of all values, not only of liberal democratic values. And I do not agree with this idea. Liberal democracy arises as a limitation of the state, of the political power, in favor of some values and rights. So, liberal democracy means that the state, that the public powers are obliged to protect some values, some rights. And as Egils suggests, militant democracy is an ideal instrument to achieve this protection. It is a limit to the use of democratic instruments when they are used to go against liberal values. And Egils asked the following question: is militant democracy useful to fight against attacks on democracy that come from within the system, from political actors playing with the system? I believe that militant democracy is useful. And I think that some of the judgments from the European Court of Human Rights and even the Court of Justice of the European Union are good examples of how useful it is. In my opinion, both courts have recently made use of the principle of militant democracy when they have considered that populism puts democratic values at risk. Let us take a look to the European Court, for example. Article 17, as we know, of the European Convention sets the abuse of rights clause, a clear expression of the principle of militant democracy. The purpose of this clause is to prevent anyone from using the rights of the Convention to undermine the values that the Convention itself defends. The European Court used these clauses to combat 20th century totalitarian political movements and denialism. In the 50s and 60s, the European Court made little use of this clause. However, as we know, when National Socialism seemed to reappear, the court used it more often in subsequent decades. But what is interesting is not only that the European Court has used the abuse of rights clause more or less depending on the situation, but also that it currently expands its use beyond totalitarian movements and denialism. For example, it currently uses the abuse of rights clause to exclude racist or religious hate speech on the grounds that such speech is contrary to the values of the Convention. And nowadays, this means that populist attacks from within the system will not be limited by the principle of proportionality, but can be directly considered as prohibited by liberal democracy. And since I have only 5 minutes, I would like to end my speech by adding the following very briefly. Militant democracy is still adequate to combat today's populism, but I also believe that we should use other instruments that liberal democracy offers. The first is to reinforce the system of checks and balances. To enhance the public institutions and independent authorities implies a greater distribution of power. And the more power is distributed, the more protection there is against populism. The role of the opposition should be regulated with greater legal precision. The importance of non-populist democratic opposition is crucial. We must restore it to its original meaning, a part of the power structure and not the enemy of those who govern. Third, deliberative processes should be reinforced, especially in parliament, but also in other areas, as Egils said, like election campaigns. The essence of liberal democracy, we don't have to forget it, is deliberation prior to decision making. And finally, it is essential to reformulate the regulations applicable to the media. For example, requiring them to disclose the source of their funding, placing restrictions on anonymous information and anonymous opinion, or combating fake news as the EU is already doing. For the moment, I will let it here. Thank you very much, Egils, and thank you for everyone.
Yeah, thank you very much. Also, we will discuss this after all panelists has saying their statements, and we will continue with President Harbarth from German Constitutional Court. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. First of all, many thanks to President Levits for having invited to this panel and for chairing it. I will focus on two aspects. First, on the meaning and the relevance of populism, and second, as Laura just has done for Spain, on the idea of our constitution about militant democracy. Populism is often compared to a chameleon in that it constantly adapts to new frames of reference and then enters into an antagonistic relationship with them. According to the well-known definition from Dutch political scientist Cas Mudde, populism is based on the separation described by President Levits of the population in two homogeneous and antagonistic groups: the people on the one side and the corrupt elite on the other. In this respect, populism is a thin-centered ideology which is typically combined with other ideologies, for instance, from the left or the right. But what do the currently growing populist tendencies mean for liberal democracies? At first glance, the relationship between democracy and populism could well be described as ambivalent. At its root, populism is based on the essential democratic demand for popular sovereignty. Against this backdrop, populism is sometimes regarded as a positive stimulus for the democratic system, as it can bring to light deficits in implementing the principle of popular sovereignty and, if necessary, trigger a course-correcting process. At the same time, populism constitutes a real danger, particularly to liberal democracies. I will limit myself to two central aspects in this regard. First, populism attacks central and fundamental components of liberal democracies by invoking popular sovereignty. Liberal democracies are characterized by an intrinsic tension between popular sovereignty on the one hand and constitutionality, or the rule of law, on the other. In a liberal democracy, there are certain constitutional principles which are placed beyond the reach of the popular will. Populists, however, reject any constitutional limitation of the will of the people and thus cast doubt on essential elements of liberal democracy, such as the rights of minorities and independent institutions for the protection of fundamental rights. Second, populism undermines the culture of open debate that is essential for a functioning democracy. The democratic political system is characterized in particular by an open, pluralistic discourse, as well as by the constant and public negotiation of political, economic and social issues. The German philosopher Jürgen Habermas has memorably pointed out that the people only occurs in the plural. In contrast, populism is characterized by anti-pluralism as a result of its claim to exclusive moral representation. Populists who regard the people as a homogeneous unit typically claim that only they represent the will of the true people. In this way, an open democratic discourse that respects diverse points of view and interests is fundamentally called into question. At the same time, populism weakens open, solution-oriented discourse by means of substantial simplification and distortion, particularly through the provocation of emotional reactions, dramatization, and black and white thinking. In this context, a disastrous alliance may form between populist communication and modern mass media. But what does this tell us with respect to the right way to deal with populism? To the extent that populism seeks to abolish liberal democracy, the German constitution seeks to meet this with the instruments of the so-called militant democracy, a concept which is not known in large parts of the world. The concept of militant or self-defending democracy is intended, in the words of the Federal Constitutional Court itself, to ensure that persons with anti-constitutional aims are not able to invoke the freedoms guaranteed by the Constitution and to rely on its protection in order to endanger, undermine, or destroy the constitutional order or the very existence of the state. The concept of militant democracy was developed by constitutional law expert Karl Löwenstein and socialist Karl Mannheim, who both lived in exile during the Nazi regime. Löwenstein accused the Weimar Republic, which was the German state from 1999 through 1919 through 1933, of having capitulated to its enemies, and in 1937 appealed for a new concept of democracy, namely that a democracy must defend itself. The words of Carlo Schmid, a famous politician of the Social Democrats in Germany and one of the drafters of our constitution, during a speech before the Parliamentary Council in 1948 are well known. Quote, "For my part, I believe that it is not part of the notion of democracy for it to create the necessary conditions for its own destruction. One must also have the courage to be intolerant of those who want to kill democracy by democratic means," end quote. Unlike the Weimar Constitution, which did not contain any relevant protective mechanisms against its destruction by an anti-democratic majority, the current constitution provides for a number of instruments of militant democracy. I will just mention them very short. First, association whose aims are directed against the constitutional order can be prohibited. Second, parties that by reason of their aims or the behavior of their adherents seek to undermine or abolish the free democratic order can be prohibited by the court. Third, the most potent weapon of the militant democracy potentially is the forfeiture of fundamental rights. That means that an individual can lose certain fundamental rights for a certain period of time if this person misuses those rights to fight against the free democratic order. And finally, the so-called externity clause, which stipulates an unamendable core of the Constitution. So militant democracy is a strong concept with strong instruments. But at the very end of the day, the existence of the free democratic order depends on the opinion of the people. And therefore, the idea of militant democracy should not be regarded as a guarantee to preserving the instrument, but we must understand that at the end of the day, the important thing is to convince people that their lives will be better in a free democratic order, because only then, despite all those helpful instruments, the free democratic order will be strong enough to defend itself against its enemies. Thank you very much for being here.
Yeah, thank you, President Harbarth, also, and for you also for the mentioning of this very important concept, militant democracy. I am using most self-defending democracy. It's maybe a little bit better, but the same meaning. So we will continue with Madame Kokott, Advocate General of the European Court of Justice. And the this is the highest court of the European Union, and European Union is a union of 27 liberal democracies. And also European Court of Justice has a word to say about the governmental form in the member states. And I then give the floor to Madame Kokott to explain the role of European Court of Justice in this context.
Buen dia, muchas gracias por la invitación. I'm very happy to be here on this prestigious panel in beautiful Dominican Republic. And I will talk about the concrete measures the European Union has taken trying to fight against populism. The Commission and the Court of Justice supplement each other, trying to safeguard democracy and the rule of law in the member states and beyond. The Commission: freedom of speech and equal chances in the political process also need protection in the digital world. Therefore, the European Union adopted the Media Freedom Act and the Digital Services Act. The Digital Services Act is to prevent illegal content, but also content producing any actual or foreseeable negative effects on civic discourse and electoral processes, as well as disinformation. So-called trusted flaggers shall search for such content in the internet and report it to authorities. The so-called trusted flaggers cooperate with the governments in the member states, and the EU Commission provides guidelines for the whole procedure. According to former Commissioner Thierry Breton, the European Union had initiated such a Digital Service Act procedure in the course of the 2024 presidential elections in Romania, and had intended to do so if in the 2025 German election Elon Musk were to position himself in favor of the AfD political party. The Court of Justice, in its more recent role as the European Union's constitutional court, focuses on safeguarding the rule of law and the values of the Union even beyond its borders. According to its president, direct quote, coupled with the Brussels effect, the principle of autonomy operates as a powerful instrument that promotes liberal values outside the European Union, enabling the Union to operate as a beacon of freedom, democracy, and justice for the wider world. In a world where authoritarian regimes are on the rise, we should all have high hopes for the principle of autonomy of the European Court of Justice, end quote. Autonomy means that the court interprets the terms used in legislation and the treaties without too much consideration of member states' legal practice or public international law. Rather, the court is free to find its own interpretative approaches in light of the values of the Union. Thus, the Court of Justice established a type of constitutional supervision of the member states as follows. Under Article 19, Union Treaty, member states shall provide remedies sufficient to ensure effective legal protection in the fields covered by Union law. Article 2 of the Union Treaty refers to the value of the rule of law. Those two provisions combined, according to the court, is the basis for the Court of Justice's competence to monitor the organization of the member states' judiciaries. The rule of law is not the only value laid down in Article 2 Union Treaty. That provision also refers to democracy and solidarity, among other values. The debate currently is in how far those values, in particular the value of democracy, provide a sufficient basis for procedures before the Court of Justice against member states. In her most recent article, Concretized, Flanked or Standalone, former ECJ Judge Rossi does not exclude procedures against a member state for violation of the value of democracy. The plenary of the Court of Justice is currently dealing with such potential standalone character of the value of democracy in the procedure against Hungary as to its law prohibiting children from accessing content which promotes or portrays gender identities that do not correspond to the, quote, sex assigned at birth, end quote, sex reassignment or homosexuality. By certain violation procedures against member states, the EU Commission apparently had been testing out legal waters how to judicially enforce democracy. The Commission, in its new composition after the 2024 elections, seems to be more cautious in that regard than its predecessor Commission. The Court of Justice and its president, on the other hand, continue focusing even more on the judicial implementation of values as the rule of law and democracy. Are there any risks? The vagueness of certain terms like disinformation in the Digital Services Act has been criticized, and even more so the whole approach of trying to implement democracy top-down. Normally this doesn't work. For the ECJ, this can become risky should its bold and innovative judgments no longer be fully accepted and implemented. Therefore, convincing argument, neutrality, and also legal certainty are so important for the acceptance of the judgments. This is a big challenge for the Court of Justice in view of vague terms, as for example disinformation and unprecise values, including the value of democracy. Let's hope that the court will be successful in so far. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Kokott, about the situation of the European Court of Justice and the competencies in order to defend democracy, liberal democracy as a whole, including the rule of law. And now to Víctor Olea, president or just former president of the Mexican Bar Association. He will speak in Spanish.
Thank you, thank you. I will try to explain also in English to the panel, but it's a real honor and privilege to share this panel with this kind of personality. It's an honor. Les quería decir, el tema específico para todos los que hablan español, que veo que es la mayoría, el tema es muy atractivo. The Populist Challenge to Liberal Democracy and the Rule of Law. Verdaderamente el populismo no es fácil de definir. Populism is not easy to define, as President Harbarth said, pero sin embargo se utiliza como sinónimo de antisistema, al parecer sin tener en cuenta ideas políticas específicas. Sin embargo, a los populistas se les considera críticos de las élites y que solo ellos representan al pueblo. Ahora bien, en el mundo actual estamos francamente invadidos de líderes populistas. Lo más peligroso en mi criterio es que el populismo lleva hacia el autoritarismo. Eso es verdaderamente lo más delicado. Como bien lo describió la conocida periodista y escritora Anne Applebaum en su conocido libro El ocaso de la democracia, ese autoritarismo implica un enorme riesgo no solo para la democracia misma, sino especialmente para el Estado de Derecho. En este panel, y por falta de tiempo, solo me referiré a dos casos, el de México, mi país, y el de los Estados Unidos de América, nuestro poderoso vecino. Comencemos por México, en el que ya tenemos una reforma constitucional aprobada que modifica sustancialmente la estructura del Poder Judicial mexicano en todos sus niveles. Por decirlo menos, este experimento en México que deriva de un gobierno populista, hay que reconocerlo, es regresivo y yo agregaría muy peligroso. Sin lugar a duda, en el próximo mes de junio enfrentaremos una elección judicial que sin lugar a la más mínima duda tendrá un abrumador abstencionismo y que anticipo será un atronador fracaso. En fin, no podemos regatear ningún concepto. Nuestro sistema jurisdiccional en México, derivado de políticas populistas, será algo que nos llevará a un fracaso rotundo y a disminuir la independencia de la judicatura en mi país. Será un desafío brutal para los colegios de abogados y para la comunidad jurídica nacional. Pero el autoritarismo no solo deriva en México, y por eso les decía que quisiera yo abordar temas también de nuestro vecino país, Estados Unidos de América. Ya en una carta publicada en el New York Times, firmada por más de 1000 académicos del derecho en los Estados Unidos, ya se dijo: la ley no es lo que el señor Trump diga que es, él no es un rey. Y en efecto, hemos todos constatado que también en los Estados Unidos se empiezan con conductas francamente populistas a llevar a cabo el desacato, como también sucede en México, a resoluciones jurisdiccionales. Tenemos el ejemplo claro de aquellas resoluciones que ordenan o no trasladar o regresar a aquellos migrantes que han sido deportados ilegalmente a esta terrible cárcel de El Salvador. También la invasión de competencias en base a decretos, las críticas y embates contra los jueces por parte del Ejecutivo en Estados Unidos, los choques entre el presidente Trump y el presidente de la Suprema Corte norteamericana, y a últimas fechas el memorándum presidencial que afecta a las firmas legales de abogados que consideran están atacando políticas del presidente americano. Esto es de la mayor gravedad, ya que más allá de su dudosa constitucionalidad de este tipo de decretos que afectan el ejercicio de la profesión de abogado, a los clientes de los profesionales del derecho y también, ¿por qué no decirlo?, implica la persecución del gobierno americano a la profesión legal cuando se litiga en contra de diversas dependencias gubernamentales. En suma, también no solo en México, sino en Estados Unidos nos encontramos ante graves ataques a la independencia judicial. Veremos a futuro si esas intentonas autoritarias y de grave retroceso democrático pondrán o no en peligro en ambos países la situación del Estado de Derecho. Yo opino que esto traerá una erosión importante a la democracia, no solo en México, sino en Estados Unidos. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this explanation, especially in Mexico, as I know that there is a plan also to introduce elections of judges. And of course, you are specialist for judicial independence, Professor Shetreet. Maybe then you can follow now about this and other questions. Yeah.
Thank you, President Levits, for the invitation and for gathering such a distinguished group of panelists in a short time, I have to say. So that shows how concerned you are with the situation of populist movement around the world, and which is in fact increasing. It's not decreasing, but increasing. I would like to make 4 comments about this issue. One is to introduce some conceptual discipline into how we define democracies. That's one. The second is to give the patterns of interference with the fundamental rights and judicial independence, etc., in the various countries, just the patterns, of course. And third, which we already discussed, is the issue how the judiciary and the legal system responded to this challenge. And the fourth comment will be on the digital challenge, where you mentioned already, Mr. President, the Romanian case, which is a revolutionary decision. And these are the 4 points I would like to make, but in case I will get carried on, you give me a sign and I will follow your orders. You are here the boss, not only in terms of time, but also in terms of making sure the content is properly done. So political scientists today distinguish between 4 forms of system of government. One is liberal democracy, which is the subject of our discussion today. The second is called electoral democracy. The third is called open autocracy and closed autocracy. Why is it important to distinguish? Because we have to make sure that nobody can claim that it is a liberal democracy if we don't have free press, we don't have judicial independence, we don't have protection of minority rights, etc. I don't want to go through the various things. And therefore, the argument that we in illiberal democracies are just following the will of the people is not an argument. Democracy is not the day of election, and whoever receives the majority, like in Hungary, 2/3, you can change the whole system, or the same as happened in the previous government in Poland, or as it now happening in Israel, I'm so sorry to say, but I have to admit. So therefore, we have to stress that liberal democracy is only the first category. And I would like to mention here that there was an ELI, European Law Institute, report. It's called ELI Charter on the European Democracy, published in 2023. And I would like also to mention ELI Mount Scopus standards, European standards of judicial independence, in 2024. In these two documents, very important issues have been resolved and offered insight into how it should be. Now, the second point I want to mention is what are the patterns that we know of intervention with liberal democracy. Of course, briefly, according to the time allocation. One, increasing erosion of fundamental rights. Two, is populism has led to an overemphasis of the majority rule. I mean, the will of the people as a general justification. Third is the unregulated power of digital platforms that has introduced a new layer of democratic vulnerability. And fourth, the doctrine of defensive democracy that has to be exercised more forcefully by the courts in order to defend. Now, I would like to mention, just by reference to already what was mentioned, what are the legal responses that were used. One, of course, we call it the abuse of power of the constituent authority, that even the constituent authority is limited to in certain issues. And another concept is the constitutional amendment. This is two doctrines that are used when we don't have eternity clauses, like in the Grundgesetz. And so these two doctrines serve as a substitute to limit the constitution, any legislature who wants to change basic core values of the constitution of any country. In Israel, it was used, both doctrines were used last year, and a basic law amendment was struck down when it attempted to block judicial review of government decision, and also another case where there was a special ad hoc or personal legislation to block disability of the prime minister. In these two cases, these doctrines were used as a response to this issue. And finally, I want to make the comment about the digital fake news and digital campaign. Following what has took place in Romania, we have to not only wait until the court finds that the whole election should be invalidated, but we can take actions prior. For example, technological matters to make sure that identity of anything that is put on the media is recognized, and some very technical technologies that have been used already. And when this is misused, then we can go to the landmark case of Romania. But I think much more effort have to be invested in devising, regulating in advance, and not wait until the fake news, disrupts the right will of the people in the elections. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Shetreet. I think it's very important that you differentiated the different forms of democracies. There are democracies and authoritarian regimes on the other side. But within the democratic groups, there are also certain subgroups, and the full democracy, accordingly to certain monitoring indexes, are only in 25 states, including from this part of you, Costa Rica, but also Spain. Then there are, I think, 40, and Germany also, yeah. Yeah, also. 25 only, then, but not US, for example. Then more or less 40 states are flawed democracies with different deficiencies, and then the rest are non-democracies, so we can see. And the problem which we're discussing here is a backsliding of liberal democracies to deficient democracies first, and maybe after, then also to authoritarian regimes. Whether we can have some obstacles to this backsliding. So thank you very much. And now to Professor Marieta Safta. You are, as a Romanian case is mentioned several times here, and maybe you can give your opinion on that. Not so much in terms of the facts. We are assuming that the facts are real, but how to deal with that from the judicial point of view, or from the judicial point of view of liberal democracy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, President Levits, for inviting me to contribute to these timely discussions about, let's say, the evolving concept of self-democracy in our times, when threats to democracy have taken on subtle and insidious forms. It was mentioned before, the advancement of the technology, the artificial intelligence, social media platforms. Of course, in my short intervention, I will focus on particularly sensitive area of action of new threats, meaning the expression of democratic will in the elections. Because the recent experience of the presidential elections in Romania in 2024 highlights the risk associated with the use of artificial intelligence and social media platforms in electoral manipulation, disinformation, and propaganda. Indeed, an important question arises in this context, meaning the intervention of the courts in democratic processes, especially when it comes to cancelling the elections and disqualifying candidates. And this ruling of the Constitutional Court, mentioned before many times, particularly the annulment of the presidential elections held on December 2024, provides much to consider for our discussions today. Without delving in specific facts concerning this ruling, I'd like to emphasize just a few things because this ruling is without precedent also in terms of the case law of the Constitutional Court itself. Because the Constitutional Court invested itself ex officio without specific provisions in this regard in the Constitution or in the law and organizing and functioning of the Constitutional Court. In fact, the Constitutional Court interpreted in this way its competence in electoral matters, meaning the general wording of the Constitution toward the observance of the election for the President in the light of the role of the Constitutional Court, so the guardian of the Constitution, the guarantor of the fundamental law. Also, the Constitutional Court based the reasoning on some documents issued by the Foreign Intelligence Service disclosed for the public. And based also on these documents, the Constitutional Court found that the electoral process for the President of Romania was fundamentally flawed through its duration and in every stage. So not only the first tour of elections, but the entire electoral process. Key reasoning of the court refers to systemic misinformation campaigns favoring one candidate, algorithmic manipulation and preferential treatments on social media, non-transparent electoral financing, violation of labeling rules for political advertising, and unequal access to digital public sphere. In the court's view, the irregularities distorted the will of the electorate to such a degree that the legitimacy of the process could not longer be upheld. Of course, this decision of the Constitutional Court sparked intense national and international debates, and it was mentioned before that in December 2024, the President of Parliamentary Assembly of Council of Europe requested an urgent opinion from the Venice Commission. The Venice Commission reaffirmed the power of the courts to annul the election, but as ultima ratio, the action must remain a last resort reserved only for the extreme cases where all other instruments that failed. But we should think, what does it mean, this ultima ratio in practice? I think that, and also Venice Commission emphasized in this report that it means legal procedures clearly defined, procedural safeguards, which must ensure judicial independence, transparency, rights to appeal, and any action be proportional and necessary to protect democratic order. So we have to reflect and to think that we have all this instrument and all these guarantees to support our court's action. And another dilemma, another question arises, I think, can courts defend democracy alone? And what happens when apparently courts are somehow against courts? Because something happened also recently in Romania, and I'll explain in 2 minutes. A local court of the country, a local court of Ploiești in April, so very recent, annulled the ruling of the Constitutional Court annulling the elections. In fact, the context is interesting as well, because it looks, according with an investigation, a journalist investigation, that over 130 applications for the annulment or suspension the ruling of the Constitutional Court were registered with the Courts of Appeal in Romania in a short period of time between April 8 and 17th of April. It is an interesting moment because we have a calendar of elections right now, new elections established based on the Constitutional Court's ruling. When a website called Give Our Round 2 of Elections Back, users were instructed step by step how to sue in court the Constitutional Court ruling. And this model of action against the Constitutional Court ruling, initiated apparently by a former judge, circulated on TikTok and was appropriated by anyone who wanted. But only one judge in a regional court upheld this application. But this singular decision created a lot of debates in our system, a lot of position in favor or against the court, and against or in favor the judge who pronounced the decision. But also it was interesting that we had immediate institutional reaction. The Electoral Bureau, the Central Electoral Bureau, issued a press release explaining to all the people that the calendar, yes, the calendar of the elections will continue. And in one day after the ruling, the High Court of Cassation of Justice admitted the appeal filed by the Constitutional Court and the General Prosecutor's Office. And I will close this story and this idea with the affirmation that the episode itself and all these stages and all these struggles highlights both the power and fragility of judicial institutions standing against the populist backlash and digital mobilization. And these days in the public discourse in Romania was reminded a proverb that said, "A fool throws a stone in a pond, and a 10 wise men struggle to get it out." And I think, according to the previous speech, that it's not about only to take the stone. It is about the prevention and to develop instruments to prevent all these facts to happen in our democracy. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much. And maybe thank also to Romania to give this revolutionary decision which we can discuss. And because it's, maybe we will need that, maybe for other countries, but we should develop certain preconditions of such kind of decision. And this is a theoretical issue. And now we are turning to Deputy Minister Mazur from Poland, who is exactly dealing with the opposite, to correct the decisions of the previous government, which has weakened the position of judiciary, or in generally, which has weakened the judicial control over the majoritarian decisions. And how to do it, especially when there is an independence of judges, and the previous government has appointed a number of judges legally or illegally, and I think you can answer this question, and maybe this is a little bit hope that it is possible to reverse such decisions. Please, Minister Mazur.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. I will stand during speaking, firstly to show the respect for the audience, secondly because I'm a criminal judge, sitting as a judge for 28 years, and I don't want to sit anymore. I've been seconded to the Ministry of Justice only 1 year ago, so not a long time. So what I'm going to say will be from the point of view of rather of a judge than a politician, because I still don't feel a politician. So, buenos dias, good morning to everyone. I want to start from the short resume of what has happened in Poland during recent 8 years, between 2015 and 2023. What we faced then was the anti-democratic backsliding, which was done via salami tactics, so step by step. During this time, one institution after another responsible for sustaining democracy and rule of law was politically subordinated. It started from merging positions of Prosecutor General and the Minister of Justice in 2016. Then we face unconstitutional assumption of political control over the Constitutional Tribunal, which excluded real control of the constitutionality of the draft laws, and it happens in December 2016. Then in 2017, we face taking administrative control over the ordinary courts by carrying out a purge of the court presidents, which were dismissed by the former Minister of Justice one after another without giving any reasons. Then in 2018, we faced taking political control over the process of appointment and promotion of judges by transferring the right to elect 15 judges members of the National Council of the Judiciary from the bodies of judicial self-government to the parliament, which was dominated by only one party. Then the next step was politicization of the disciplinary proceedings against judges. There was a moment in which I faced 5 disciplinary proceedings for speaking out in the public. One is still in progress. Then we faced gradual assumption of political control over the Supreme Court through creation of 2 new chambers, the disciplinary chamber, top disciplinary court for judges, and extraordinary control and public affairs chamber, which has the control over legality of elections. Then the judges were prevented from challenging the legal status of falsely shaped National Council of the Judiciary and from challenging the legal status of defectively appointed judges. It was introduced by famous, or rather infamous, Mazur Act, which prohibited judges from application of EU law under the threat of professional death under the threat of removal from profession. And then we face gradual process of taking control over ordinary judiciary, over Supreme Court by staffing ordinary judiciary and Supreme Court with falsely nominated and promoted judges with participation of this non-constitutional National Council of the Judiciary. What was the perception of Polish judges, independent Polish judges, of this entire situation? At that moment, we understood that the rule of law is like oxygen. What do I mean? In normal times, you don't notice the rule of law. You just breathe with full lungs. The rule of law seems transparent. As soon as it is limited, then you are out of breath and you feel strangled. That's what we felt, we independent Polish judges, for 8 long years. Then I wonder if you know what's the difference between the optimist and the pessimist. It is very relative, because optimist believes that we are living in the best possible world, as the pessimist is afraid that the optimist is right. So I will describe you 2 situations which has happened during these times of attack against Polish liberal democracy. One is for optimists and another one is for pessimists. So the situation for the optimists. When this attack on the independence of the judiciary was developing, we sometimes felt completely helpless. We had a feeling that we are not able to resist efficiently, in spite of the fact that we as judges did everything what we could. And then suddenly the government, in the former government, under the auspices of the party which name was and still is Law and Justice. And it is the most ironic name for the political party you can imagine. So in the middle of 2017, they came with a very simple idea of reforming of the Supreme Court. What was the idea? The idea was that on the day after the new legal act will enter into force, the terms of office of all judges of the Supreme Court will expire, and then the Minister of Justice from Law and Justice will appoint their successors. As simple as possible. And we as judges were really frightened of this idea. And then suddenly something very strange happened. It looked for us as miracle. In normal times, the problems of independence of the judiciary are not very popular among the society. But in this particular moment, one of the judicial association distributed through social media the idea of creating of chains of lights around the courts. And it started the biggest wave of anti-populist demonstration in Poland. The demonstration lasted for 8 consecutive days, and they were growing in force every day. People were gathering around courts in 300 Polish cities. In top moment, 2 million people were protesting. And because of that, President Duda, who is ex-member of Law and Justice, vetoed this draft law, and he rescued independence of Polish Supreme Court to such an extent that this institution, which was going to be assassinated within 1 day, is still until today in 40% independent, because 40% of judges are still independent. This shows the power of the society which understands the meaning of independence of the judiciary. This was this positive example. Now,
Mr. Measure, maybe you can turn to your measures, what you are doing in order to reverse the situation.
To reverse the situation, we have just prepared the new legal acts regarding particular areas of the judiciary. We have to prepare the new act on the National Council of the Judiciary, which is going to be independent from political factor and which is going to be elected by judges in transparent elections. And this draft law is already drafted. Unfortunately, President Duda has sent it to the Constitutional Tribunal, which is a kind of anchor of autocracy, so it's in the fridge. We have to prepare the new law on the Supreme Court to liquidate these two newly created chambers and institution of extraordinary complaint, which was introduced during Law and Justice time, which undermines the stability of the legal system. We have to prepare the new draft law on the structure of ordinary courts in order to rebirth the judicial self-government, to rebuild the proper disciplinary proceedings for judges. And the biggest challenge is to prepare the draft intertemporary law, which will heal the legal status of not properly appointed judges, both in the ordinary and in the Supreme Court. And these draft laws are ready, but we have to wait until the change of the president. But I wanted to give this negative example just for the end. Because after this vetoing of this law on the Supreme Court, the previous government prepared a huge anti-judicial campaign, which was called the Blackboard campaign. What was the idea? In entire country appeared thousands of huge format billboards, which were designed in black and white, and which described the real and alleged judicial misbehaviors. Some of these examples were true, some were false, some were manipulated. And one of the judges very aptly commented at that time that in the situation in which one of the branches of state power pays negative black PR campaign against another branch of power of the same country is so peculiar that even George Orwell or Monty Python couldn't have invented it. And that's another thing which we have faced in Poland during this anti-democratic backsliding. What's the conclusion? The conclusion is that we are living in very, very dangerous time in which those people, those politicians who give simple answers to complicated questions gain popularity. So we all judges and all academics of law should consolidate and should resist to such dangerous tendencies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister Mazur. You explained so in detail how the populist governments are dealing, taking over the judiciary, and also the difficulties how to reverse that, but you are trying, and I assume that you will succeed. So it is, but one of the problem is why there is a justification, should be a justification for application of further development of militant democracy, but you, President Harbarth, and you mentioned is that such developments are irreversible normally. Without revolution, it is very difficult to come back to the liberal democracy from a flawed democracy. You are an example of that there is maybe possible, but it is very dangerous and it's very, so to say, not sure. So we can then open the discussion to the public, and you can put short questions maybe to specific participants, and then we can go to the discussion. Please, I see already.
Take a mic.
Oh.
No. So, again, good morning, everybody. My name is Jurist. I'm the president of International Association of Judges. And I just wanted to comment a little bit on the Polish situation. I think the International Association of Judges has the whole right to do so because we are supporting the Polish judges from the very beginning till now. So the main problem for Poland now is how to restore the rule of law by the means of rule of law. That's when my just comment. And the second issue is this backslide of liberal democracies. If you can compare the society as a human body, we are witnessing something which is autoimmune disease now. And the first step of every democratic, of every populist movement is to capture the Constitutional Court. And if you capture the Constitutional Court, you can do everything, because then every move, what you do, will be constitutional. So it is very important to keep the Constitutional Courts as strong as and independent as possible. And I see if you can comment on that.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, please. Please. Yes, maybe there.
Okay, Anna Telvarzocha, University of Gdansk from Poland. So what I wanted to ask you is if you know or could you provide some concrete examples of militant democracy in action? So what I mean, for example, in Poland, there are some positive also remarks that we can provide, because when the Constitutional Court was captured and it was not effective at all, and we didn't have any instruments to protect the Constitution, what the Polish court started to do was to have like a dispersed constitutional review. So the court reinterpreted the Constitution and said, okay, if there is no institution to protect the Constitution, so we can do it ourselves. Before 2015, it was impossible in Poland. We had just a strict centralized model like in Germany, Austria, but now I think we are a hybrid model. So we've got the Constitutional Court formally, we do not have it in reality, but also our courts decides in cases just referring to the Constitution. So the Polish judge can say, okay, I will not apply that law. Yes, so this is like, you know, in Latin America countries, this mixed model that has, you know, developed, I think, as an example of a self-defense of democracy. So yeah. Do you know any other such concrete examples?
Yeah, thank you very much. Maybe you can say some words.
In our constitution, we do not have any explicit provisions as to how the idea of the militant democracy works in terms of how to defend against the attempt to capture the court. So we do not have something like a special instrument like a prohibition or ban of political parties and things like that. But what we have, and I think what is very important, is a well-thought concept of the election of justices. So let me show it in our case. So there is not one instance that appoints or elects the justices, but there are two bodies, two chambers of parliament. Each chamber requiring a two-thirds majority, which is very difficult to get. And third, the elections do not take place at the same point in time. But something like every year or every second year, a number of elections has to be made. And that means even if you have a majority in parliament, it is very difficult to capture the court because you need a 2/3 majority for maybe 6 or 8 or 10 years in both chambers of the parliament to really get a majority of the court. So first comment, I think it's very important to have really a convincing model of separated of the separation of influence on the election of justices. And second comment, what is really key, I think, is what Shimon said, that we think about, is there an unamendable core of the Constitution, even though it is not explicitly stipulated within the Constitution? So we see this notion in many countries, and I think there is something like that, because, for example, if you have a catalogue of human rights in a constitution, I think this is an implicit guarantee of an independent judiciary that cannot be amended or set aside, because if you change the constitution in a way to make sure courts are no longer independent, then the entire catalogue of fundamental rights loses its value. So I think we must understand that in jurisdictions in which those provisions do not exist explicitly, one has to develop ideas as the basic structure doctrine in India or in Bangladesh and many others to make that true. And if those two instruments, good election system and an amendable core, then I think the courts are quite in a good position.
Good, it's a usable recipe. For that, there are maybe 1, 2 other questions, short. Yes. The questions, then maybe I can give 1 minute for each. We'll start with Minister Mazur. But 1 minute as last word.
Well, the last word is that, as my colleague from Gdańsk has noticed, in Poland, for example, constitutional control currently works in a kind of emergency mode. We doesn't have what we like, so we like what we are able to provide for the benefit of the society. But my hope is that, and I do strongly believe, that our current government will be able to reverse this awful situation. We have already prepared the draft law on healing the legal status of falsely appointed and nominated judges. We presented it for the opinion to the Venice Commission, and we really do hope that during the Polish elections, which are going to take part in May and 1st June this year, the pro-democratic president will win, and we will be able to fully restore the rule of law in Poland. That's my wish. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Mazur. Professor Safta.
As a concluding remark of the panel, I think that the democracy, the protection of democracy, could not rest and should not rest only in the hands of the courts and I don't know, other institutions, because you asked about also the design of the Constitution in order to ensure this self-defending democracy. It is our shared responsibility, and it must start with education, with civic education for the future generation. It was thus discussed also in the opening of the Congress, and I agree with it.
Thank you very much, Professor Shetreet.
2 points. One is that the role of the courts in crisis time is very important to emphasize that it is not a normal time. So maybe in normal time, courts have to be more cautious to intervene and should allow some kind of activity by other branches of the government. But in crisis time, as we have already heard, It is the duty of the court to be active. And I can say that if the judiciary will not defend democracy, democracy will not defend the judiciary.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a very good conclusion. So, please, Mr. Olea.
Yes, well, I just can say that populism and authoritarianism are really very dangerous regarding the rule of law. The cases of Mexico and United States are very, very dangerous also. And the independence of the judiciary is vital to really have something to do as lawyers against populism.
Thank you. Yeah, Madam Kokott.
I agree with President Stephan Harbarth that the process of electing the judges is very, very important, and judicial self-organization is not necessarily the better approach, because, for example, in Germany, I think recruitment of the constitutional judges with participation of the parliament works quite well.
Yeah, thank you. President Harbarth.
I will conclude by asking you to understand your roles not as some kind of legal technicians, but as strong promoters of the rule of law. So it is up to us as lawyers to explain the people that and why without the rule of law there is no freedom, there is no democracy. So please go out and tell everyone and act as a personal a beacon of the rule of law. That is probably more helpful than many mechanics in the Constitution.
It's not mine. Thank you very much. Well, I think my last word is to say that the fight against populism is also related with a democratic culture. I think that we should know, we know that democracy needs Democrats, and a good democratic constitution does not guarantee democracy. Mutual tolerance and institutional restraint is also necessary, and I think this is very important at the point that we are now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the participants of this discussion, for all participants. And I think we can conclude to think that liberal democracy is now in danger, in crisis, but there are also judicial means, but judicial means not the only one. There are political and so on, but also judicial means like militant democracy, which can, to a certain extent, defend liberal democracy against backsliding. Thank you very much. And see you in the next panels again.